Hey everyone, welcome to Politics in Perspective. I'm Tom Del Beccaro. I think we have a great show for you. We have two guests that'll talk about California and also talk. My friend Steve Cohen will talk about CBS and also talk about his amazing race for Congress. My opening statement will be on the Democrats embracing the radical. John Fleischman will round up what happened in California politics, and I'll give you a quick redistricting update. But let's get to my opening. Well, thanks to Ex American News, YouTube, Rumble, worldview2.com, AUNTV for carrying us. Let's talk about this issue of the Democrats embracing the radical. Last week, we talked about Plattner. Oh, I didn't know I had a Nazi symbol on me for 20 years, and we're supposed to believe that. He said he found out because somebody looked it up. And the Democrats are okay with that, right? You have Scott Wiener in San Francisco, who is way out there on social issues and children and how they, all of these things. You have Tallarico, who's an absolute joke, a mental child who they think should be in the U.S. Senate. You saw Rubio and the ludicrous questioning from the Democrats, and he says, "Is this the Foreign Affairs Committee? Is this a circus?" But something really serious happened in New Jersey this week. And it wasn't just a circus. It was the election, a primary election, where the candidate chosen by the Democrats, and I agree it was a crowded field, so he didn't run away with some big number. But nevertheless, he's their candidate. Their candidate, if we take a look at this headline, is someone who testified on behalf of the so-called blind sheikh, who inspired, played a role in, put in your adjectives, the precursor to 9/11, the bombing of the World Trade Center. This man testified on his behalf, tried to vouch for him. According to, well, look at a couple of other things here. He worked for the Benevolence International Foundation, which was designated as having ties to terrorist financing networks, which, by the way, are the subject of my producer's book, Architect of Jihad. So, wow, what a shock. There it is. Good job. And of course, AOC supports this guy. But this guy that, and Bernie Sanders and even Hassan Piker, this is a guy who allied with and tried to help someone who literally worked on, inspired a bombing of the World Trade Center. And we're supposed to forget that and say, well, he did some other things later on, which weren't so bad. But that notion, that whole dynamic, is part of my producer, Annie Cyrus's book, The Architect of Jihad. She'll explain it better than I will. But the reality is, just because they do something on the surface doesn't mean in the background other things aren't going on. So, Annie, welcome in at this point. What does it say to someone like you, who was a prisoner of Islam in Iran, that America, right across the river from the World Trade Center, the Democrats would nominate this guy?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back on. And you're correct. Yes, Democrat Party. Well, the politicians of Democrat Party have joined the Red-Green Axis for decades now. That is Islamist Marxist movement. But now the voters have been brainwashed completely to believing that a man one thing we missed when you were introducing Dr. Hamway, he didn't just testify for Blind Sheikh at his trial, he was also his translator. He took his jihadist Arabic words, translated them into English for American audience. That is being part of the jihad.
Yes.
We are at a point where, number one, Democrat voters, if you are anti Israel, pro poor Palestinians, we will forgive everything you've done to Americans because America isn't priority anymore. Anti Semitism is, anti Trumpism is, anti freedom is the priority. So this man shows up, and not only he becomes a candidate, but the voters approve of his candidacy. They cheer for him. They plaster his photos from Gaza, where he went to Gaza and testified to the genocide as the doctor who's patching people up. They plaster those pictures. They don't put out the transcript of his testimony at the court in 1995 saying that blind sheikh never meant harm to America. He was talking about inner struggle of jihad, make it to the gym and have a better life. He lied under oath.
And not just about, whether he had some bad personal thing that he did or some traffic ticket. No, this is becoming the seminal issue of our time, and he wanted it to be so from their point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
just because he did other things, please briefly, in the moment we have left on this, talk about how they lie in wait, or just because they do one good thing doesn't mean they still aren't wanting to do bad things.
In my book, which you kindly plugged, I'm going to put it back on the screen for your audience to grab the title, The Architecture of Jihad. There are 10 different faces of jihad that I go over. And amazingly, in this specific case, every single one of those 10 faces of jihad applies to this specific candidate. Very rare case where I can say this candidate have done every single 10 of these jihads against America. Born in Egypt, moved to America as an infant, so technically an American-raised man, is doing everything in his power to fool the Americans to gain more power in Congress so they can become majority to pass the laws that are going to go against our Constitution.
And we need to wake up with this. And this is, they don't, not all of them declare this. Some do, some sheikhs do. But the politicians don't declare it. They just work on it. And they're not going to line up across the border always from us. Thomas Sowell says the barbarians are inside the gate, universities and the like. All these protests in the universities. People like this in Congress. Do you really think this guy should get national security information? I mean, look what happened in LA this past week, where a man was indicted for sharing secrets and material with Iran. America's got to wake up, folks. That's my opening statement. We'll be right back with John Fleischman to discuss the California primaries and how on earth it became a national phenomenon. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, folks, to Politics in Perspective. This week, as I said earlier in the show, California's been the center of attention. So I figured I'd call on my longtime friend, John Fleischman, who knows about as much about California politics as any living soul. And I don't know whether he wants to claim that mantle or not. You can find him on Substack.
Yes,
There he
sir.
is, the one and only John Fleischman, who's killing it on Substack, right?
We're doing okay. So I would encourage anybody who wants to get a daily dose of news and analysis on California politics to come on over to sodoesitmatter.com. So isn't
There,
that Tom's jealous because I have my marketing genius right behind my shoulder here. But in all seriousness, it's great to be with you, Tom. You're a very serious person who is with all the smiles aside. It's not easy to be a leader of conservative thought and opinion and politics in a state as liberal as California. So for people like you and I, it means we're made of sterner stuff because weaker people would just stop the fight or head off to Texas. And instead, we stay and try to make a difference.
do you remember so many years ago, John, when The Economist said that the spines of assembly members were stiffened by the likes of John Fleischman and Tom Del Beccaro? That was like in
Yeah, they're still.
2010 or something.
Yeah, that was back when we actually could do something in Sacramento. The Democrats have such large majorities now that we may have Republicans with stiff spines, but there aren't enough of them to stop any bad bills. So.
So, all right, well, let's talk about that dominance. California was at the center of attention nationally. You turn on the news, and the California primary led. I don't know the last time that was the case, but why don't you give me your first impression of what you saw this last week and the ongoing counting?
Well, I guess we got a couple things going on. The first thing was, there was this, you and I talked about this early on. There was an effort by the California Democratic Party and one particular California Democrat consultant, Paul Mitchell, to really kind of spread this rumor that possibly two Republicans were going to lock out the Democrats. You and I both pointed to the math and reminded people that there aren't enough Republicans to do that. And we were right, of course, because what ultimately has ended up happening is we've been flirting with, in the end, could it be two Democrats that shut out the Republicans? And the good news is Republicans really did consolidate behind Steve Hilton. You and I both made some urgent pleas to, I mean, I think you've been with Hilton all along. I, on the other hand, I kind of stayed neutral territory until finally I reached a point where I just had to tell people, you know what, we're at a risk of getting shut out. You need to back Hilton. And I did hear from an awful lot of Bianco supporters. I think because I hadn't endorsed Hilton, I had some cred to be like, hey, don't come to my guy. We're all going to that guy. But more importantly than us, I think just collectively Republicans kind of figured out that they needed to consolidate. So by the time it's over, you've got Hilton, in the high 20s, and I think Bianco, when the count's done, will be in the high single digits. We still have a lot of challenges for November because if you were to go on the Secretary of State's website right now and look at the totals, when you add up the totals for Hilton and Bianco, it's that same roughly 40% that we've been locked at in California. That's the margin by which Trump lost to Harris in 2024. It's the margin roughly where Prop 50 won over back in November. And so the mission for Steve Hilton is pretty straightforward. He has to focus on turning enough NPP voters to take 40% to 51%. It's certainly doable, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work. As far as the ongoing day of counting, I would say this, because I get a lot of people who just, especially from Newsmax, but I get a lot of people that are like, well, this must be some conspiracy theory because the way that it goes down is we're winning on election day. And then afterwards, the votes keep coming in. And then by the time it's over, the Democrats have won. It's voter fraud. And I'm not saying that there aren't instances of people voting that shouldn't vote. I've not been convinced that there's wholesale voter fraud. So let me take a moment and explain why the votes come in late and why they lean Democrat, especially this year. So California, you can like it or not like it, but there's a set of laws that have been set up that are designed to maximize every single person's opportunity to vote ad nauseum, right? Like the effort, it should be effortless. You shouldn't actually have to perform any effort to vote. So the first thing they do is they put a live ballot into everyone's mailbox, And I will tell you, over time, you're watching the percentages change. It used to be, okay, a few people used it, and then more people used it. We are now at a point where the vast majority of Californians, Republicans and Democrats and independents alike, are like, I'll just mail in my ballot. It's too easy. They pay my postage. It's right in my house. So the first thing you have is that the number of election day voters has got to be down below 25% by now. So the number of people that are actually walking into a polling place and voting, very small. And then you've got all these people that are mailing ballots, and a growing percentage of them are mailing them late, especially this year when the
Yeah.
Democrats were really trying to decide which of a lackluster run of candidates they were going to try to get behind. They held on to their ballots. And so what happens is, if you're the registrar of voters in Contra Costa County where you live, or in Orange County where I live, you're all of a sudden facing hundreds of thousands of ballots showing up at your ROV, not only on election day, but California law says it postmarked by election day, and they can be received by up to 7 days after election day. So the ballots keep flowing in. And then last but not least, we've got other rules. Like, for example, if I voted in Contra Costa County has 2 weeks to send my ballot to Orange County. So Orange County can't even finish legally its tally of the votes for, at a minimum, 2 weeks after the election, because they have to wait in case any ballots that were sent to the wrong county have a chance to be sent over. And so, we're used to this, right? I always joke, if it's the general election, that you're really sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner not knowing who won the election. And for us now, we could be celebrating the 250th anniversary of America and not knowing whether Spencer Pratt is running against Karen Bass. It's really, which by the way, among other things, becomes an incumbent protection tool, because someone like Spencer Pratt needs that month if he's going to take out the incumbent mayor, and instead it's, pardon the pun, la la land, right? So again, you get two things happening: late votes, and then these late votes skew Democrat because Republicans voted early,
Yeah.
earlier.
In the olden days, the Democrats were, olden days, like in the last couple of cycles, the Democrats have been voting early. But as you point out, they ran seven dwarfs, or as I like to say, seven dwarfs this time around. So there's a lot of headlines about how the Democrats have held on to them and this
Right.
7 day period. So there really is a bunch of votes coming in on
And, and
Monday and Tuesday.
and it's not hard to see why somebody who doesn't understand these details might think there's voter fraud going on, especially because this is another interesting phenomenon that's important. If you're every day you're tuning into the Secretary of State's website or your county ROV website to figure out what the count is, and there's a number that says X number of ballots left to count. Well, now that you've heard this, you understand that every day, not only are they counting ballots, but every day new ballots are being tossed into the to be counted bin because they're showing up in the mail. And so you might wake up in the morning and it says, 42% of the vote left to count. And then right in the middle of the day, it says 45% of the votes are left to count. And you're like, this is screwy. This is messed up. If we have the time, it's worth spending another moment talking about how the United States Supreme Court may be putting a fork in this. I wrote about this yesterday at, as we say, so does it matter.com. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case that is before the court now. Oral arguments were heard a few months ago. And this is a case where the RNC, actually, the Republican National Committee, brought forward a suit saying, hey, the statute for the law says there's an election day, not an election month. Therefore, you can't accept ballots after election day. They have to be election month. And this has now made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, where, if you're somebody who pays attention to the court and its process, one of the most illuminating points in the process, maybe one of the few, is when they hear the arguments from the proponents and the opponents of a case, and then the justices ask questions, because you can kind of augur where they're coming from based on the questions they ask. It was very, very clear that this kind of originalist / textualist court was kind of like, it doesn't say election month, it says election day. So if the court rules as is expected, it may mean that as soon as for November, all federal races, all ballots have to be received by election day. And that would include California and the 5 other states besides California that allow this voting after election day or ballots to be received. So if that happens, there'll be a stark change for November. The Democrats are just going to have to, who knows, maybe they'll let people start voting another 2 weeks early, but they're going to have to tell people your ballot must be received by election day. And that will mean that the count will go much more quickly.
Okay, a couple things. Yeah, I agree with all your points.
I'm walking all over Tom because he's a little under the weather. He's lost his voice, and I've charged into the breach.
Okay, so is there a mini revolution going on? My next guest today, Steve Cohen, ran in the 50th. He spent $1,600, John, against an incumbent with a 2.5 to 1 registration edge, and they are neck and neck. Kevin Kiley, the redistricting, he was supposed to be redistricted out. He's in the lead. He could win this with the Republican vote once they see he's in the lead.
Oh yeah,
Pratt,
if you take Kylie's vote and combine it with the Republican, they're at like 48% right now. And
yes,
ironically, right now Kylie's in the lead, and it's the Republican in second place. Although experts don't expect that to last. But the point being, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say there's a revolution. A revolution would mean looking at the statewide numbers and saying, instead of 40%, we're at 45, 46. Like there's a markedly bigger percentage. I do think that the Prop 14 ballot measure that passed in 2010 that you and I vociferously campaigned against has created some weird outcomes. And I also think that, and this, I hate to get wonky again, but when you redraw congressional district boundaries and you try to get too aggressive, the way you get aggressive, right, is by you go in to say, if you're trying to get rid of a Republican seat, you need to blow it up. And then, but those Republican votes have to go somewhere. And so you get seats that are more Democrat that become more purple as they absorb those numbers. And so there's a fine line about how aggressive you want to be. And I think it's entirely possible that the state was already pretty much as Democrat as it could be in its lines. And this effort to make it just a little bit more may have been a bridge too far. And that's where you get situations like you talked about in California 6 with Kevin Kiley. That district was, quote unquote, drawn to elect a Democrat. But Kevin Kiley, at the moment that he changed parties, which by the way, he did at the very last minute, on the very last day. And when I asked him about why he waited till the last day, he said, well, I didn't wait long after I decided. I just decided on the very last day. It might be a genius move because it allows you to capture the center vote and reach out back to the right in the general election, which may prove to be interesting because I know Paul Mitchell pretty well. He's the Democrat consultant that drew the lines. I think he has a particular dislike for Kevin Kiley. So it would be very ironic if,
right?
like the one member of Congress, I think he enjoyed splicing and dicing his district the most, ends up keeping a seat in Congress.
Okay, you and I both write for the California Post. You took an interesting angle talking about the Democrats, and in your piece, you made a suggestion of how you think the Democrats may have to campaign this fall. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, I mean, the argument that I made is that, Democrats are going to have to do something different because, Steve Hilton and Pratt, right? These are not. I mean, we have upped our game on Democratic nominees, right? If you look at 4 years ago, Brian Dawley's a friend of mine. He's a state senator from the North State of Jefferson, right? And he was the nominee against the governor. And he's a really nice guy, but everyone has different skill sets. And Brian's skill set, he would tell you, is not being on a debate stage, going back and forth that way, right? He knows how to work his coalitions, put together votes. He's a smart guy, but that doesn't mean that he has what Steve Hilton has. I mean, there's a reason why Steve ended up being a host on Fox News with his own show. He's extraordinarily charismatic. He's extraordinarily well-spoken. And as you and I would say, because it's really important to us, he's really well-studied. He really understands public policy and understands his stuff, which we Tom and I and people that are watching this show, because if you're attracted to Tom's type of analysis, it means that you also care deeply about policy and how things work and why they work. Steve articulates this better than almost anyone I know. And so actually, my column talks about how the Democrats are going to have to adapt to this. But since I wrote that column, I was on the John Phillips show in Los Angeles, and we got into a discussion, and he said something that I thought was pretty intuitive. He thinks that Becerra is going to have to go into the bunker. He thinks that Becerra's strategy is going to be, I need to be generic Democrat, because anytime I get on a stage with Steve Hilton, it's going to end poorly for me. And so there's no point of doing that. So we really got into a discussion about how could Steve Hilton bait him to actually come out and debate. And, you know, the ideas were things like spending a lot of time in the more Hispanic parts of Los Angeles, you know, calling him out, right? Going on all the news shows and calling him out, because those things are all going to have to happen. And then, you know, we can predict that the big battle at the end of the day is going to be that Spencer Pratt and Steve Hilton are going to want to debate ideas, because we win. We win on ideas. And you can be sure that the Democrat unions that run the state of California, the Democrat unions that run the city of Los Angeles, are going to want to pick up the Prop 50 playbook and once again make it all about a referendum on Donald Trump. And if we're successful at making this a debate about the ideas, who knows what can happen. If they're successful about making it about Trump, we're going to lose this election.
But don't you think, or did you see some of that wearing thin? Where, okay, you can blame Trump, and they do that, but I gotta believe for some voters that they don't. In LA, that doesn't mean that homelessness is going to change if you blame Trump.
No, I mean, this is the beauty of Spencer Pratt. Spencer Pratt, with relatively small amounts of money, certainly compared to what Caruso spent 4 years ago, with a relative, you know, and kind of a very viral video campaign, both his and supporters, and his style of, like, you know, if you watch him in any discussion, no matter what question the media asks, he comes back to talk about what he wants to talk about. And he has put the mayor on her heels, right? She is, when she gave her victory speech on election night, which was I'm going to make it to the runoff, she had a defeated look of somebody who just got, you know, she just lost a referendum on herself. Almost 2/3 of Angelinos whose votes had been counted voted against her. And, you know, he's got her on the defensive because, again, she's got to defend streets that don't get repaired, street lights that don't work. Hollywood is disappearing. There's crime, epic homelessness. The city's not ready for the Olympics. The city's not ready for the World Cup. The place is an entire mosh pit of a mess. And Pratt has forced a discussion on that, which, to your point, really makes it hard to divert the question away from that. Because at the end of the day, if you're somebody from Los Angeles, you know, it's great. You want to talk about some guy in Washington who's in his last 2 years. Why don't you talk about why our city is so jacked up? Because it's not Donald Trump's fault.
Yeah.
Right.
I think a benefit for the coming into the midterms is that Karen Bass is a national story. She's defining the party, her radicalism, Mondami's radicalism, and Johnson in Chicago. Their policies still exist. They govern 1 in 25 Americans, and they're trying to run from it. But it's newsworthy. The great thing about Pratt is if a normal Republican ran, that race would get almost no airtime whatsoever, right?
Well, and it would be over right now. That normal Republican would have gotten 16% of the vote, and that would be it.
Yeah.
Instead, he's very likely to be in a runoff. It's not over till it's over. There's still hundreds of thousands of ballots to count in Los Angeles, and he's got about a 30,000 vote lead. So those are Democrat ballots still coming. But I'd rather be Spencer Pratt right now than Nithya Raman. So we're going to have an interesting general election, Tom. I'm sure you and I will get plenty of chances to talk about it. And I'm going to stay tuned because I would really like to hear about this wonder candidate that you've got interviewing right behind me. I think it's going to be an interesting. So I'm now helping you out. So if you're watching this, don't go anywhere. Stay in your chair. Stay watching the program.
All right, before you leave,
Yes, sir.
over under, how many debates does Becerra and Hilton have?
I'll be surprised if there's more than one. There might be two because I think there'll be a like an LA Times / regular media debate, and I think Alex Michelson will get them on CNN, and so I think it'll be 1, 2, and done. And after that, it'll just be they'd rather endure the criticism, right? And if those two debates aren't close together, and Steve Hilton does what I think he would do to Becerra, the second one might get canceled.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's the fourth most important economy in the world, but God forbid we actually had a real discussion between the two people who will have such an impact on it. All right, John, it does matter, folks. If you care about California and you want to know north to south what's going on, sign on to his Substack. So does it matter? So does it matter.com.
That's
John,
right.
we'll have you back as the election gets nearer for sure. And we'll be
All right.
right back on
All right.
Politics and
Take care, Tom.
Perspective.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for everything you do.
All right, boss. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. I'm particularly pleased to have this next guest who has quite a life. He's been a media executive or was for decades, including one of the top executives in New York City when in the olden days. Is that fair to say, Steve?
Yes.
We have a picture up of his first memoir of all the people in television and the like, but he has several of them. And about 2 months ago, he shocked me and said, I'm running for office in San Diego and San Diego County, congressional seat, which he had no business doing. And the Democrats have a 2.5 to 1 registration advantage over you. And you, against my better judgment, you spent no money. And why don't we bring up that page, if you would, the showing the results that he got. And there you are, neck and neck with the incumbent. So, first of all, Steve, thanks so much for coming on. And what the hell were you doing running for office, and how did you do that? Tell people how much money you spent in this
Zero.
primary.
I raised no money. I asked for no money. I did have a list of people, but I called them and I said, look, you know me, you've known me for 20 years. I ran an independent newsroom in San Diego. And I said, I don't want your money. All I want is your support. Can you call a few people for me? And that added up to 65,000 votes. By the way, no other Republican on the San Diego ballot has received more votes than I did. I'm the #1 vote getter in the entire primary with 65,000 votes. That includes incumbents, guys that have been politicians their whole lives, like Jim Desmond, all of them. So it's the Democrats and me. And you know what, Tom, that really got me interested in this was the grievance policy of the Democrats. You know, I've spent my life covering politicians, meeting with politicians, interviewing them, critiquing them, getting to know them. And somehow, through, I'd say, the last 15 years, the Democrats went from being a party of some policy to being a party of no policy and grievance. By grievance, I mean what you call Trump derangement syndrome, but I just call it grievance. It's a party of, I don't have an answer. I just don't like what you're telling me. So after a while, you get to a point where I said, I was consulting for Newsmax, you know, good outfit with Chris Ruddy, and I said, the party actually came to me because I had thought about it and not done. But the party called me one afternoon, a March afternoon. I was doing my work for Newsmax, getting ready to watch Ed Henry, And the party calls, the guy from the party calls and says, "Hey, Steve, how are you?" I said, "I'm doing fine." He said, "We'd like you to be on the ballot to run against Scott Peters." And so I hang up. This is true story. I figured this is a hoax. You know how that everybody gets these hoax calls, right? So I hang up, and about 15 minutes later, he calls back. He says, "Steve, I'm not kidding. We would really like you to run on the ballot. If you'll put up the money, we'll help you get the signatures, and March 9th, we'll get you on." So I think about it for like 20 minutes, and I call him back, and I say yes, and then I call Mr. Ruddy and say, "Chris, I have to resign because it would be a conflict of interest, but I'm going to go for this." And he was, of course, very, very kind and said, "You're crazy, just like you did. You have no chance. It'll never happen." And so then I wrote to my buddy, Jason Cable Rowe, who also is a well-known political consultant. And he wrote back exactly the same thing. "What are you doing? This is lunacy. It's almost 3-1. You have no chance." And so that even emboldened me more, because I realized that the party just wanted me to be a sacrificial lamb, right? They just wanted a name to help out. And then I began talking to people about my simple idea, which is we have to be about something. We have to be for things. And the things that I'm for are big things. I'm not looking at, just no more shutdowns, and go to automatic ACRs. I'm talking about big ideas. And people were responding to me. And so I got, obviously, because I'm a TV guy, I got on TV. I got great earned media, right? People knew my name anyway, or some people did. And then I had a buddy who helped me, owed me he didn't owe me favors, but he was just a nice guy and let me do some videos. So then I went on social media, Instagram and X, and started saying what I'm telling you. These are big ideas. We have to stop screwing around. Like one of my favorites is Social Security. Report came out today. 2032, 24 to 28% cut in what all of my generation, which is 62 million of us, 18.5% of the country, right? And we're going to get cut. It's my money. Okay, Congress, what has Scott Peters or any of those guys done about it?
They've created the crisis by overspending.
Right. And spending on things that are about the 20%, not the 80%. So that's been my philosophy has been, I believe in majority rule while protecting constitutional minority rights. That's what I believe in, period. I think that's the rock solid bed of this country is majority rule. Now, if the majority doesn't agree with us and the majority is wrong, fine. And let's get the majority on the right path. Civil rights would be a good example of that, right? America was not into it, but it took us years. It took us 100 years to get there, but we got there. And I feel the same way today, that there's an opportunity. Not everybody talks about common sense. I'm not talking about common sense. I'm talking about ultimate reality of things that we've got to do right now to make sure America is better. The other thing that people ask me is, "Well, you're a Trumpian. You're a MAGA guy." I said, "Well, no. I happen to align with Mr. Trump's policies and Mike Johnson's agenda. I do align with most of it, but I don't align with all of it. But I'm not about again, I'm about next." So I say to people, no, I'm not MAGA. I'll make America better. What the hell do we want to do to make America better? What outcomes do we want? Well, fix Social Security. How about a balanced budget? How about if we actually get the military up to 5% of GDP instead of 3.5%? Those are the things I believe in, and that was 65,000 people that voted for me. They weren't all Republicans, my friend.
Okay, so first of all, I don't want to leave Social Security, because the biggest threat to Social Security is 1.5% to 2% growth. Because at that level, that means too many people are out of the workforce and not enough revenues coming in to save that program. The same is true for Medicare. So keep that in mind. So
100% right.
So, by the way, folks, Steve and I have been spoken over the years. He was kind enough to put me on KUSI in San Diego repeatedly, despite his better judgment. He even read my book. He did have an insomnia problem, but he told me his insomnia is over now. So, nevertheless, I agree. People love you down there. I agree they know you down there. You're a very smart man. You have what's missing, perspective. You're not just political. Okay, I buy all of that stuff. I know it to be true. Nevertheless, you shouldn't have gotten that vote total. It is what's going on in California. Spencer Pratt, Steve Cohen, Kevin Kiley. They tried to draw him out of his district, and he's leaving the race. There's something going on. What do you think it is?
I think what is going on is inherent in the process of not moving in the direction that most Californians want. We're all here for a reason. We love California. This is not a state that you get stuck in. It's not like when I worked in Detroit. Nobody wanted to live in Detroit. Okay.
I just lost all my Detroit viewers. I'm sorry about that.
Well, no, I love Detroit. I had a great time there. But I think that Californians are here for a reason, which is we love California. And the California dream, as Steve Hilton would call it, has been hurt by lack of integrity and action in the direction of the majority of us. So the result is that while a legislature of Democrats could simply by one vote get rid of the California taxes on gasoline and give us a gas tax holiday, right? They won't do it, right? So things that are just so obvious. $24 billion to homeless by the state's own audit. They couldn't figure out where it went. $24 billion lost. And after a while, the Democrats, and remember, this is a state that has a very large mixed population. We are truly multi-ethnic and multicultural as a large state. And whether you look at Latino population, traditional American white population, you see that there's discrepancies in just the basic economic well-being of all of us. And after a while, that gets to an inflection point. And I think that what Steve Hilton has gotten onto, and what Pratt has gotten onto, and I think what I have always owned, is that you can be whatever party you want, but you need to have your basic needs fulfilled and your hope for the future ratified. Somebody's got to ratify that we're here for a reason and it's a good place. And that stopped. Gavin Newsom could give a good goddamn about what I'm feeling because my Social Security might get cut or my ends don't, or I just can't. I can't afford gasoline. Who are we kidding? So I think that's what happened. We hit the inflection point of basics, and once you got down to the basic needs, Democrats are moving. Now, will they move powerfully together in a certain direction? No, I don't know that. I mean, I know, like in my own race, it's not like putting money into a slot machine, but it's like putting money into a blackjack player. I'm a smart blackjack player. I know how to play the game, so I've got a shot. I'm not a slot machine, right? And so I'm hopeful.
All right. Well, look, you got a fighter's punch, or the analogy I prefer as someone who grew up on Long Island. You have Joe Namath's chance to pull an upset. Briefly, before we switch topics here, I also feel that there's a sentiment out there that the blame everything on Trump is wearing thin in California. That doesn't, homelessness existed before Trump, the crime, all these things existed before, and the Democrats their go-to response is a meteor hit the desert, therefore it's because Trump's global warming. Do you see that?
I think that you're hitting on something that's very important. Mainstream media out here and in the nation continues to sell that everyone hates Trump, continues to sell the idea that he's failing. And when you look at what's really happening, like our employment numbers today and jobs, great job report, it's not true. But the mainstream media and Democratic polls, particularly here in California, every speech they give, I just saw one for the 48th district by the Democrat running there. She made sure that the entirety of her speech was, I will go to Congress and I will get Trump. I will attack Trump. Scott Peters, on many other issues, not such a bad guy, but every speech is, we've got to stop Trump. And so I've said, look, if you care about these social issues, that's fine. Don't be a congressman. Be a social worker. Go. If you care about the immigration detention centers, I'm for inspecting them. But this sense of that getting Trump is the answer is obviously so wrong to most Californians. I agree with you. I think the hidden message here is it ain't about Trump anymore. It's where do we go in the next 2 years politically, and what choices do we set up in the end of this administration for whatever is going to happen next. And I think Californians have already made the choice. Donald Trump, if he builds an arch, I don't like that. So what? What I care about, am I going to be employed? Is he going to fix Iran? Are we going to get our gas? All those things. And the Democrats, as I said at the beginning, they have no answer. They have a grievance. Grievance isn't an answer to our problems. And they are the party of grievance beyond being the party of the what I would call Democratic Socialist left now.
Okay, I have an absolute expert on American media in you on my show. Scott Pelley made quite the existence. I don't know what you want to describe. 60 Minutes has lost more than half its audience from its beginning. It has plunged. It plunged. He came in 2003 and it plunged some more. I'm not per se blaming him, but I do think his arrogance in the whole thing was unbelievable.
Yeah, I have a lot of history in this world of 60 Minutes. When I was news director in New York, WCBS TV in New York, in charge of the largest newsroom in America, into my morning meetings would often come Don Hewitt, who was the creator of 60 Minutes. So Don would come in and school me. He'd say, Cohen, that story sucks. You're missing this. Why aren't you covering this? And I was very fortunate to have an engagement because he was right down the hall from me. 60 Minutes was created in a time when we all believed that there were honest brokers, right? That the job of a journalist was to be an honest broker. And I think all Barry Weiss and the Ellisons are trying to do is get back to that. When you think that 60 Minutes has drifted so far afield into the hands of the progressive left, right? And then forget all that, but for Mr. Pelley, who is an employee, to give what I would call a sanctimonious speech. Sanctimony is a sin. For journalists, it's a crime. And he stood up and sanctimoniously lambasted his new chief, Barry Weiss, in the network. He should have done something honorable, which would have been to say, thank you very much. I don't think I can stand your leadership. I don't agree with your leadership. And I think I should move on to something else. Therefore, I am voiding my contract. I am going to resign. Now, if Mr. Pelley did that, my respect for him would have climbed, because that's what good-hearted people do to solve problems, rather than to rant and rave in front of the television cameras to become the story of the day. You agree with that?
Well, yeah, dignity missing. I have the sense that him and Colbert and others believe that this is their domain, and economics and good business, or let alone journalism, they have no right to be questioned, and yet their numbers fall. Are they that removed from reality that they don't realize that this is a business? And oh, by the way, a rapidly changing business?
I think the answer to that is that you have to be led. You have to be well managed. On-air people are not like the rest of us. You're one of them. There's a drive to communicate. There's a drive to believe in yourself. You have to have that to be good at being on television. But there has to be someone who can give you boundaries and say, look, this is the world you live in, Mr. Colbert, and guess what? You have a declining audience. Now, maybe that's about your content. Maybe it's about other factors. It doesn't matter to me as the guy who's running CBS. This is a paying outfit. You've got to do that. Now, in news, for many years, news made no money at CBS, right? News made no money at CBS for many, many years. But Mr. Paley said, this is important to America. This is part of who we are. We have to be honest brokers. And he believed it. And the result of that was that there were parameters for what on-air people were like. And, look, as you know, I was fortunate to hire, be with, lead an entire generation of American journalists, from Lester Holt, Brian Williams, Bill O'Reilly, Meredith Vieira, you go on and on. And that was because I was in the right place at the right time with the right leadership skills, where people felt, I'm going to listen to Steve, right? So I know who I am. And when I would pull somebody back, like Bill's a great example, one of the great forces in American journalism for all the, I've known him since the 70s. But in the early years, we were just two young bucks in New York trying to kill each other. And fortunately, I listened to him more than he listened to me. But there have to be parameters, boundaries, and leadership. And I think that all those folks at 60 Minutes lost track of that. Colbert, all of late night, humor is one thing, sarcasm is another. Bob Hope was humorous. Carson was humorous. Jack Parr was great at having a wry sense of humor, but nailing people. They all said what they needed to say about Reagan, Nixon, and the others, but they did it in a way that was actually funny.
Yeah. Oh, humor, actual humor, as opposed to sticking the knife and trying to turn it. Steve, we're out of time, but this topic and more, we should bring you back and talk more about it. I appreciate you coming on.
Love it.
Thank you for everything you've done in this amazing race, and I'm going to keep track of that. So thanks for coming on.
Happy to do it, Tom. Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we'll be right back with more Politics in Perspective. All right, everyone, welcome back to Politics in Perspective. I hope you enjoyed those two looks at California from different angles, and also from Steve Cohen. John Fleischman's right. Republicans have to actually vote and get out to make the difference, to cause a mini revolution. They can't just go by the old numbers. There's millions of Republicans that don't vote. They need to get out and vote. Now let's do, in the political roundup section, a update on redistricting. And Alabama was a focus this week. Alabama had two districts that were drawn for racial reasons. They redid their map. And this is Alabama. This is deep Republican territory. And the Supreme Court said, okay, now you can do the map, which shows 7-1. So that is a Republican pickup. All of these things will blunt the number of other seats that Republicans will lose around the country in this particular midterm. Or will they lose them? Because in California, Gavin Newsom did the redistricting. And as John pointed out, Kevin Kiley was supposed to be drawn out because he was the chief critic of Gavin Newsom. But look at the results here. In his race, he was the top vote getter. The Republican was the number 2 vote getter. Now, whether the Republican holds on is a question to be determined. You know how these things go in California. But Kiley's going to be there. And Kiley could well win this race. And that would be hysterical, ironic, whatever you want to say, because Gavin Newsom specifically wanted him to lose his seat because he's such a critic of Gavin Newsom. So maybe the Democrats have bled their races too thin, meaning they drew the lines and diluted the value of a particular congressional district, called it a Democrat district, but in reality, those Republican votes that were there or in the new district will make the difference. And maybe that's how it turns out this fall, where the Democrats don't get these big pickups in the redistricting places that they thought that they would. We'll have to see. Well, that's our focus for this week. I'd appreciate, as always, if you could join me on Substack, get my books, send this show to other people. We have a growing audience. We got a lot of good reviews last week. I think we do interesting subjects. We have a great producer who gives us great insight on all things Islamic. Buy her book, buy my books, and we'll be back next week on Politics in Perspective.